Hello and welcome to this presentation on asbestos in residential property. I am a chartered surveyor and I look at houses and flats, low-rise flats. Really there's no high-rise stuff around here, so nothing too complicated. Asbestos. What I propose to talk about is what it is, why it was used so widely, why it isn't used anymore, and then I've included perhaps too many pictures which demonstrate where asbestos can be found in houses. So firstly then, what is asbestos? Well, it's a naturally occurring mineral. There are numerous varieties. Well, I think that's probably not true. There are 6 varieties. And the ones which are most widely used tend to be categorised by colour, and this seems to be a reference to the colour of the ore that they come from, rather than any material that they're turned into. So we have famously blue, brown and white asbestos, and the understanding is that the blue and the brown tend to be the nasty stuff, and the white asbestos the less nasty stuff. So what we've got here is a picture of a regular piece of asbestos. It is a mineral. You can tell from the picture that it is fibrous, and this is pretty much the essence of asbestos. It's turned out to be useful partly because it's fibrous and also deadly because it's fibrous. This second picture is brown asbestos. I mean, the clue is in the colour. I mean, it looks like hair, doesn't it? I think very fibrous once again. And the following picture is blue asbestos. I suspect the photographer's been playing around with the colours because it does appear to be very blue. And on the website I found this, it is described as Bolivian blue. Which sounds very much like something you ought to be able to smoke, but you can't smoke asbestos. That's one of its properties, and if you did smoke it, it would obviously make you very, very ill. If you want to smoke something, I think Colombian black is what you should be looking for, so I'd recommend that instead. So the uses of asbestos, or its properties really, it is fire resistant, so very good for insulation against fire. So you find it around boilers, partitioning out garages or anything else that's got flammable materials within it. It's probably good for thermal insulation as well, so if it's fibrous and it's all fluffed up, it makes a good insulation material to prevent the loss of heat. It is not absorbent, so you don't need to worry about it absorbing moisture, and it's also resistant to chemical attack, so it makes a good roofing material. It's not going to be affected by acid rain, anyone who can remember that, or it's not going to get wet in the absorbent sense of the word, and it's cheap as well, I think. The fibrous nature of it, of course, makes it good for binding stuff together, so used as a sort of a material to bind others together is also a useful property that asbestos has. And with all those properties, it then pretty much got included in all sorts of stuff. And if you look at the HSE website, it includes a list of things that asbestos was used in. Now this is a fairly long list, and it seems to be a sort of roll call of 50s, 60s and 70s products, which mean absolutely nothing to me. I mean, what is magnesium oxychloride flooring? I mean, you wouldn't know if you were walking on that. Limpet, lion jointing, major tile, marble coat, marinite. I mean, no idea what these things are. My suspicion is then, if you're in a sort of mid-20th century property and there's anything which isn't regular plasterboard forming ceilings or walls, then it might well include asbestos, and well, all sorts of flooring materials too. Interestingly, this list of products includes reference to various slates, which are quite significant to a surveyor, I suppose. So things like the Eternit slates, now they're still manufactured, but We know that blue and brown asbestos was banned from 1985, but this HSE website reports that they were, these tile manufacturers ceased using blue and brown asbestos in their slates in 1980. So it's almost like they were, what's the word, anticipating the ban, and so they reformulated their slates years before, so that whilst they could still include asbestos after 1980, they evidently chose not to. But how many manufacturers that applies to, I don't know, but certainly there's a few of them listed here, probably the main ones that stopped using asbestos. Well, I mean, to be specific, they stopped using blue and brown asbestos in 1980. I mean, whether they used anything else instead, white asbestos, I don't know. So the question is, why stop using this very useful, versatile material? Well, I've got a picture of Steve McQueen here, the famous actor. Well, he was famous if you're my age. If you're younger than me, maybe not. But he joined the US Navy when he was about 18, 19, 20, that sort of age. The US Marines. And one of the tasks he was given was to clean out the insulation from a ship's boiler room, something like that. And I'm just using my imagination here, but I'm just imagining there's a whole load of white fluffy insulation material and he's stuffing it all into bags and there's dust going everywhere and he's breathing loads of it in. Obviously oblivious to the risk, no idea at all. And he completed this task, and that was the end of that as far as he was concerned for the time being. But 30 years later, at the ripe old age of 50, which is somewhat younger than I am now, he became ill with breathing difficulties and eventually died of asbestosis. So that's just one example of how it took 30 years for inhalation of asbestos to lead to death. This is a close-up of asbestos fibres, and you can see that these are nasty, spiky little bastards, and you can kind of imagine it's not going to do you any good to inhale those. These are probably blue or brown asbestos fibres. I mean, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, but the point is that they are stiff and erect, and very good for penetration. Now, if you contrast those with white asbestos fibres, the understanding is that they are soft, a bit limp, a bit curved, and you can imagine something that's hard and stiff is going to penetrate much more effectively than something that's a bit soft and limp. I'm sure you can imagine that. But if you stop imagining that is the principal reason why blue and brown asbestos was banned before white asbestos, which carried on being used until 1999 because it's understood to be less dangerous. What I understand the asbestos does to you, I mean, I've read about it, I didn't really understand too much of the detail, too many long words, but it seems to me that if you inhale asbestos fibres, they will stick into your lungs and then spend the next several years slowly migrating deeper into your lung tissue until eventually they start affecting the functional tissue. And the way your lung deals with this is by walling it off or creating scar tissue around the asbestos fibre. Now, if you've got one asbestos fibre in there and you've got a tiny little pinprick of a scar inside your lung, you'll probably not notice it. And perhaps a lot of us already have these little bits of asbestos stuck in our systems. But if you have a whole load of them, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of little scars and blisters forming inside your lungs, it's going to affect your ability to breathe. And this is what really kills you in the end. Interestingly, the presentation by the proper asbestos fair made some deal about removing asbestos samples from ceilings carefully, because you might dislodge asbestos and little bits might get stuck in your carpet. And this seems to sort of dwell on the one fibre kills theory, but if I read what the HSE website says, it's not the HSE, it's the government's website. It says breathing in high concentrations of asbestos for a prolonged period of time is what might result in illness. So that seems to be a long way away from the one fibre kills thing. And I don't think there's any domestic environment in which you're going to be breathing in large quantities of asbestos fibres over a long period of time. So that sounds like it should be within the residential environment. A harmless sort of material. Further comment on that later, of course. So, blue and brown asbestos were banned in this country in 1985, and white asbestos much later in 1999. I mean, why would you want to ban anything that's light, white and fluffy? And you might as well ban kittens. It's appalling. So, after 1999, there's no more asbestos in products in this country, and in theory we're not importing any either. However, across the world it's still widely used. This brings me to Russia. This is a picture outside the city of Asbestos in the Urals in Russia, a city where they like asbestos so much they've named the town after it, and below that it says Moy Gorod I. Actually, I don't know what it says, I'm just pretending, but it's a city named after asbestos, and this is an aerial view, and on the left hand side you can see the city with a population of about 70,000 people. And on the right hand side there's, well, I was about to say fuck off big hole in the ground, but I think perhaps I should just say there's a very, very big hole in the ground. It's an open cast asbestos mine. And that gives you a scale already, but here's another picture and you can see those trucks at the top, just emphasising how big this hole in the ground is. And the way they extract the asbestos is with dynamite. So they are blasting the side of the hill and creating a massive cloud of dust, which is just drifting over the town and over the surrounding villages, if there are any left. Well, it's basically poisoning all these people, none of whom think that's happening to them. So yes, we've banned asbestos, they haven't, but you know, what do you expect from a country that well, pumps its athletes full of illegal drugs, shoots down passenger jets and bombs hospitals full of pregnant women? They're unlikely to be very concerned with health and safety at work. And this mine apparently produces 700,000 metric tons of asbestos ore, or is it asbestos product? It must be ore. It's a big number, it's a lot of asbestos produced every year, and it gets exported to countries throughout Africa and South Asia, where they still use it very widely. And there is apparently, I mean, how big a problem is it, but a little bit of it sneaks back into this country in products which are included in you know, machinery. So it hasn't gone away, and I dare say there's plenty of asbestos fibres billowing around the environment on planet Earth now because of this kind of behaviour. So we've all probably got a few of them stuck inside us already. A last little addendum, I suppose, I forgot to mention, it probably doesn't really matter that you can get asbestos fibres stuck in your skin, and this will give you a nasty, itchy, blistery rash which you'll never get rid of. Okay, let's go and have a look at some pictures. Well, this is a collection of pictures of roofs. This house here, it's a little peculiar building anyway. It has a covering of pink asbestos cement slates. The pink's got nothing to do with this brown-blue thing, it's just pigmentation added to the slates or tiles to make them look like terracotta roof tiles, I think, in a certain respect, but then they have laid them in that diamond fashion, which was obviously a groovy kind of 1930s thing. Well, very emblematic of the 1930s. So if you see a house with pink asbestos cement slates laid in that diamond fashion, then you can pretty much date it to the 1930s, maybe a bit before, maybe a bit after. This roof, you can see a couple of repairs on that hip there, but otherwise it's a fairly good advert for the material. So this place was built beginning of the 1930s. It's now 2023, so it's a 90-year-old roof covering which is fairly intact. So hence the choice of asbestos cement as a roofing material. This one, also pink asbestos cement slates, but laid in a rather more traditional or conventional way. These houses were built at the end of the 1930s, so we've got pairs of 1930s semis. If you look at all of them, you can see the odd replaced slate or tile, but again, another advert for asbestos cement roof coverings, as these houses are about 80, 90 years old now, and roofs in fairly good condition. There's a close-up, doesn't tell you a great deal more. This is more like what you expect with an asbestos cement slate. It's that light grey colour. So if you've got a light grey roof like that, very clearly asbestos cement. This picture illustrates, it's a slate that's been taken off a roof, and it shows the overlaps, fairly generous, but the part that's exposed has that fluffy weathered asbestos cement look, and the part that was tucked under the slate above is evidently the sort of colour that it was when it was new, more or less. So my understanding that asbestos cement slates were light grey turned out to be wrong, evidently. That's just the way they weather to look. Here we have a short terrace of late Victorian houses, all of which have been re-roofed. So one is left guessing when it was re-roofed. So if you can't tell for a fact that it was re-roofed well after 1985, then there is a probability that the roofing material will be an asbestos containing material. So yes, if it's blah blah blah, if you don't know when it was re-roofed, then you need to alert your customer to the possibility that it contains asbestos. And lastly, this picture is of a little block of flats that was built in 1981. So this was before it became illegal to include asbestos in your roof coverings, or illegal to use blue and brown asbestos anyway. But after a number of the main manufacturers stopped including asbestos of their own volition. So does this roof include asbestos? Unless you can... Well, the answer is we don't know, do we, really? I think that's what I'm trying to say. Carrying on with the roof theme, this is a picture of an undercloak to the verge of a house. This is a 1960s property, and bits of it are missing, and some of it's quite ragged, so that's going to be releasing asbestos fibres, so a slightly more serious issue there. And same again here. This is a soffit, which looks to me to be rather flaky, so this is something that needs to be, well, probably time to remove it altogether, I think, really. And this property is a listed building, and this is a dormer window inside the roof valley, so you can't see it from the street, but it's an old cobbled together dormer, and one of the things it's been cobbled together with is asbestos cement, which is also broken. So some of these looks like they've nailed the two pieces back on and squirted a bit of sealant in the crack. So someone's been working on it with gay abandon, probably. But your customer needs to know it's there anyway. This is quite an interesting story. If it's interesting, I don't know. Is it interesting? It's probably not really interesting. But this is an outbuilding attached to a farmhouse, and you can see that it's got a corrugated asbestos cement roof, and at the right side of the picture some of it has been replaced. All well and good, but if you look, this is immediately underneath it, and the ground is, you can take my word for it, dotted with bits of corrugated asbestos from the smashed up roof above. So somebody's got a job to clear that lot up. So how diligent one is likely to be with clearing it up, I don't know, but there's a job to be done there. Moving on a little bit, well, a lot from roofs. This is a board which looks like asbestos cement, and it probably is, separating a boiler flue from a tank full of oil. So this is asbestos and its heat resistant qualities being used. That picture obviously got slipped in out of sync, but never mind. This is a corrugated asbestos cement roof over a single-storey front extension to a main road house in Bath, of all places. So that's obviously been there for a very long time, because I'm pretty damn sure that the local authority in Bath, who are they these days, Bath and North East Somerset, would not allow a corrugated asbestos cement roof over a single-storey part of a house anymore. And this is something you'll find quite a lot. It's an asbestos cement gutter, and there's a bit more of it. What this shows is that it discharges into a cast iron downpipe, which is a little bit unusual, because typically you'd expect to find an asbestos cement downpipe with it, but not this time. That's a soil and vent pipe attached to a Victorian property, and you can take my word for it, it is asbestos cement. This looks like, and almost certainly is, an asbestos cement flue terminal. Moving indoors, this is it's a textured coating to a ceiling, and we've heard a lot about that through the presentation by the gentleman whose name escapes me at the moment. But this is in a house built in 1991 or 1994, never really established exactly when, but before 2000. So there might be asbestos in there. 3 or 5%, I think that's what people have been telling me. Now this is going into a 1930s house. That sort of stippled surface immediately makes you think you're looking at an asbestos cement board. It is a ceiling, and it's right next to a loft hatch rather conveniently. There it is. So I was fairly sure I was dealing with an asbestos board. I'm a little bit of a short arse, so I had to climb up the ladder a little bit before I could give it a tap and a feel, and it didn't sound or feel like asbestos. And from within the roof space, it's a kind of fibre board, so not asbestos cement board yet. 1930s, who knows what's in it. I can't see any good reason for including asbestos fibres in a wood fibre board ceiling, but I don't know, so I think I will alert my customer to the possibility. And another place where asbestos cement ceilings are very common in mid-20th century houses is within garages. So again, you've got a car full of petrol and whatever else you've got in there that's flammable, so you're going to try and separate the house out from separate the garage from the living accommodation with fire retardant resistant material. So an asbestos cement ceiling in a garage seemed like a very good idea back in 1965. And on that subject, or heating, there's this. And this is an asbestos cement flue passing through somebody's bedroom cupboard. Again, a 1960s house. Would you be happy having an asbestos flue in your bedroom cupboard? I mean, some people won't like it, but there it is. Probably perfectly harmless, sitting there doing absolutely nothing, not getting weathered, not getting rubbed up and down, so won't be doing anyone any harm, but it is asbestos. This is very typical. It's an asbestos cement cold water storage tank in a roof space. It's been disconnected from the plumbing, but I think the general advice is that you leave it up there, because the only way to get it out would be to cut it up, and that would release asbestos fibres, which is what you don't want to do. So leave it as it is. Sometimes you can cover it with a black plastic bag just to make yourself feel a bit better. And here's an interesting subject. This is vermiculite insulation. Vermiculite is another mineral, but it was mined a lot in the United States and apparently processed. Well, I don't know the story. It goes something like this, though. It was either mined close to asbestos mining or fabricated in the same factories that dealt with asbestos products. Either way, there's a belief that asbestos fibres can be found in vermiculite insulation. So if you do find this stuff in your roof, you're probably well advised not to dig around in it, and you'll need to notify your client that there's a possibility that there is asbestos in his vermiculite insulation. Incidentally, I showed up at a house where an asbestos surveyor was doing what asbestos surveyors do. Bearing in mind I'm in Wiltshire, this guy was staying in bed and breakfast. His company has sent him there from Essex, and I mentioned asbestos in vermiculite insulation, and he'd no idea what I was talking about. And the same thing happened with talcum powder. Apparently, there was a period anyway when asbestos got into talcum powder. So there'd have been mums up and down the country. Well, dads can do this sort of thing as well, of course, mustn't forget that, but rubbing asbestos containing talcum powder into their babies' bottoms. Old linoleum type tiles, these are understood, by me anyway, understood to have asbestos in them, but where's the risk in that? I mean, I think you'd have to try really, really hard to get any asbestos out of there and to breathe it in. It's all glued up, isn't it? Anyway, probably got asbestos in them. This place was built in the 1990s, middle of the 1990s. So before 1999, I think that's the important thing. And if you go through that Undercroft parking area on the left-hand side, you find this. This is a soil pipe boxed in with asbestos cement board, which is damaged. Some of it evidently needed to be taken off, and they've replaced it with a timber board, and the asbestos bit seems to be leaning against the timber replacement board rather than being thrown away. So there's a bit of loose asbestos lying around. Going back to old appliances, if I ever mention them, that's some kind of ancient water heater with a flue attached to it, which is asbestos cement. This is what you expect to find: a corrugated asbestos cement roof covering to a shed. And this one, it's a shed pretty much built out of asbestos, although the shed itself seems to be falling down, so somebody's going to want to chuck all that rubbish away, so they need to be alerted that that's an asbestos containing material. Same house probably, and there's some corrugated asbestos cement used for fencing purposes. And there, broken asbestos cement board used to prop up a downpipe. So just somebody's no idea what it is, and they're just using that convenient piece of board to straighten out the downpipe. This is what you expect to find: a corrugated asbestos cement garage roof. And what's that? I mean, what are those things called? Some kind of protection to the edge of the roof, also made out of asbestos. Look everybody, it's an asbestos cement flower pot. It's not part of the house, but it's on the property and it might be left behind, so you've got to mention it. And lastly, a couple of little situations. This picture is of a 1950s council estate. Now, when I went into one of those houses, it took me a while to realise that all of the partitioning was formed with asbestos cement boards. The first clue really was that the light switches were fixed on pendants to the ceiling and not on the walls. Odd, I thought, but obviously somebody else had already realised that they were asbestos cement partitions and wasn't going to work on them. So that's a sort of little clue to something suspicious. This other property here was built in, I think it's the 1630s, so absolutely no good reason why this property would have any asbestos in it, except that it's not very far away from that council house I just showed you. Somebody refurbished it in the 1950s, and it too was full of asbestos partitioning. All the lath and plaster had come out and been replaced with nice flat asbestos boards. And I've pretty much finished my survey. The last thing I did was look under the understair cupboard. There you go. So it can be anywhere. I think that's the moral of that story. I suppose some sort of summary would be in order. There are all sorts of other things that I didn't take pictures of. So some of them I just forgot about, quite frankly. So roofing, felt, damp-proof courses, underlay, all of these might have asbestos in them, and other things that I simply didn't come across, and I don't come across them, so either they've all gone. So I mean, plastic materials, windowsills, toilet seats, bath panels, cisterns to toilets, that kind of thing. Maybe if you look at a lot of local authority housing, you see this sort of thing, but I don't, quite frankly. But I dare say some of it's still out there. What I would suggest, though, is within residential properties, there isn't really any asbestos-containing materials that are actively dangerous. You would have to drill holes in them, saw them up, and inhale. So the risk, I think, is probably very small. Nevertheless, there is a stigma attached to houses with asbestos. People don't like asbestos, really. So you have to alert them. You have to point out that they can't break these materials up because they might release asbestos fibres. And if you don't alert them, you will, at some point, quite possibly risk getting a letter with an attached bill. So I think alert people, advise them of the risks, and basically tell them not to panic. Outside the house, it's a different story, really, because these materials are being weathered and are aging, and I was not there with a camera at the time, but there are a couple of occasions I've seen roof coverings, and one of the pictures I included of soffit showed it deteriorating. So I have seen individual bits of asbestos that are really just falling apart and just shedding fibres very readily. So those sort of things we should take a bit more seriously, and I suppose it'd probably be a good idea to encourage people to replace them now before they start disintegrating like that, because they're all going to be pretty damn old by now, these things. So we'll be doing everyone a favour, I think, if we start encouraging people to get their asbestos roofs, soffits and fascias replaced. Fascias, there probably aren't so many of those, but asbestos roofs, rainwater pipes, soffits, these sort of things are more and more beginning to disintegrate. So get rid of those. So that's probably as much as I can possibly think of to say about asbestos. Thank you very much.